There we go. So, welcome, Paulina. How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, not a problem. So I guess I think it's probably best if you introduce yourself to give the viewers context to what we're going to talk about and who you are. So if you could introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. So my name is Paulina Sutton, and I'm based in South Devon in UK. Originally, I come from Poland, where I was born, and this is where I started being involved in sport. So I used to represent my country playing badminton, and I was part of badminton national team. Also, at that point, when I was growing up and started studying, I studied sports science in Poland. I started traveling a little bit more and found myself in Germany playing for a club, a badminton club, and eventually ended up in UK where I've stayed for longer. That's why I live there now. And what I've done when I've moved to UK is I always wanted to be involved in sport. So
yeah.
I started with playing badminton, obviously, and picked up the club where I was a part of the team. But also, one day I've opened a triathlon magazine and I was inspired by a picture of a woman running in Hawaii. And this is when I started reading about triathlon and learn about triathlon and what triathlon is. And I wasn't a swimmer. I was doing a little bit of running, I suppose, with badminton training. I didn't have a bike, and I started training for my first triathlon. So I took up a short distance triathlon, and then I've completed it following year. And I fell in love with it. At that point, badminton went on to the second priority. So I started being involved in triathlon a little bit more, and also took up the distances. So I started doing Olympic distance triathlons, half Ironman and an Ironman triathlons. And then until today, I've completed 6 of them.
Wow.
But also, as I was training for triathlon, I was doing a little bit of personal training and started talking to people. And I noticed that I also get a really good buzz from helping people doing triathlons as well. And that's why I've signed myself up to do a triathlon coaching course. So I started coaching people as well. And at the moment, with all the coaching and all the fun I've had with clients, I noticed that the nutrition also is very important part of training, and whether or not what sport you're doing, you are it is important to look at what you're eating. So I've recently next month I will complete 4-year course from nutritional therapy.
Nice.
And this course allows me to work with clients and improve their nutrition. So this is where I'm at the moment.
So you also run triathlon training camps in Lanzarote, is that right?
Yeah, every year I take my athletes or friends of athletes or friends of friends as well. It's like a community now. Yeah. And we go to Lanzarote every year and train there for a week or 2 weeks. I've not got my own website really yet, because I am yet to qualify next month from the nutritional therapy. However, I do have an Instagram page and Facebook page called embracenutrition.org.
Nice.
I suppose my website will be running next month as well under the same name.
Fantastic. And I'll put that in the notes as well so people can click on that. Fantastic. So, okay, so you're joining us today to talk about primarily nutrition performance. So I thought we would start somewhere quite small and microscopic in the world of micronutrients. For the sake of the viewers, and it's not to dumb it down, what are micronutrients and why do they play such a crucial role in performance? And we'll look at sports primarily like long distance running and triathlons, and we'll stick to those areas.
Yeah, so micronutrients are the nutrients that we need. Well, definition actually says that we need them in 1,000 grams or less per day. So those are things like calcium, magnesium, zinc, vitamins, minerals. So a lot of sport nutrition focused dietitians or nutritionists focus on macronutrients. So a lot of sport nutritionists focus around macronutrients, which is protein, carbohydrates, and fat. However, to achieve top performance, I think it is very important to look at the micronutrients, daily micronutrients intake. And those are mainly, because for endurance sport, mainly are iron, calcium, magnesium, zinc. So those are very important micronutrients which are often deficient in endurance athletes.
Why do you think that is? Why are they normally deficient, do you know?
So I think the reason being is that they are easily lost with sweat.
Yeah.
So you lose magnesium, for example, and potassium and sodium with sweat. So for people who sweat a lot. Also, second reason could be that the absorption or the diet is not quite right. So for example, in order to get enough zinc in a diet, you have to eat specific foods. And I know that some athletes are not keen on certain foods containing zinc, for example.
Yeah, what sort of foods are we talking about?
So foods containing zinc are oysters. So zinc, there is a lot of zinc present in oysters. This is definitely not a first choice for some people, but also pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds, so things like tahini, wild rice, organ meats. So people are not, again, nowadays not keen on consuming those. So I think the reason being that we are deficient are that we're not consuming enough of those foods, but also those foods can easily be lost in sweat.
Okay, so with regards to kind of the role that they play, are you able to talk about maybe some of the functions and the importance of why we need to get those?
Yeah, absolutely. So calcium is needed. It's starting with how much we need a day. So calcium in UK, we've got slightly different ranges. So 700 grams of calcium every day. To get to optimum level, I think we need more than that. So 1,000 grams of calcium would be something I would recommend daily. But you need calcium for muscle contraction. So if you are running, if you're cycling, if you're swimming, if you're going to the gym, and you need your muscles to work, you need calcium. Also, what is very important is calcium is needed for heart muscle contraction. Yeah. So, but with that, on the opposite side, to get the muscles relaxed and work really well, same with heart muscles, same with the skeletal muscles, we need magnesium. And magnesium is easily lost in sweat, like I mentioned before. And magnesium is needed for muscle relaxation. So that's why we need the balance of calcium and magnesium. And it is very important to keep that balance, yeah. Zinc is another one, like I mentioned earlier on, that is because zinc is probably not the favorite micronutrients in terms of getting from the food. So I normally suggest just having a pumpkin seeds or handful of pumpkin seeds a day, and that covers you for majority of zinc requirement for a day. And pumpkin seeds are not that strong in flavor. So this is a quite good tip. And zinc is needed for healthy immune system. So also, not only for that, it's also an antioxidant, and antioxidants are substances in our body that fight free radicals. So zinc is also important for not only immune system, but also for our cardiovascular function, for example. So antioxidants I already mentioned, those are substances which reduce free radicals. And like with if we're training, we're damaging, in theory, we are damaging our muscles. And with the muscle damage comes come free radicals as well. So it is important to remember that when we are training, we're actually damaging our body. Yeah. So we need antioxidants to fight those free radicals. And we can produce antioxidants in our body, but also antioxidants are easily obtained from food. And where we can get them is from rainbow foods. So rainbow foods, or all colors of vegetables, for example, are the easiest way to provide enough antioxidants. So, for example, olive oil, avocado, red onion, red cabbage, carrots, sweet potato. Those are the rainbow foods, or peppers, all different colors of peppers as well. So just to mention that antioxidants are compounds, things like vitamin C, vitamin A, vitamin E. Zinc is a powerful antioxidant. Coenzyme Q10 as well, which is very important for energy production. Vitamin D. So those are compounds which we can obtain from a healthy, varied diet. And lastly, I also want to mention iron, because iron is also often found deficient in our bodies, especially in endurance athletes, especially in females. So iron delivers oxygen into tissues and our muscles. And iron is quite complicated mineral, because too much of iron is bad for you, and not enough is bad as well. And too much and not enough, it's a gold standard mineral. You have to have enough.
Yeah.
Not having enough or having too much is very bad for you. And the signs and symptoms of having too much iron or not enough iron are very similar.
Okay.
So fatigue, poor cognitive function, difficulties concentrating, tiredness. So those are the signs and symptoms of having too much iron in the body or not enough iron in the body.
Wow, that sounds like quite a few people these days. If you took like a sample of the population, most people would say, if you listen to the words that they use, they'll say, "Oh, how are you?" They'll say, "Oh, surviving," or "Oh, I just feel knackered all the time," or so it wouldn't surprise me if there's a lot of people who are actually iron deficient, who aren't even, sporting people. Maybe they just don't consume, the rainbow foods, the organ meats and so on. But yeah, I'm definitely a big fan of pumpkin seeds. Oh, yeah. I find them quite moreish. Yes, they haven't got a lot of flavor, but if you chew them, oh yeah, delicious.
Absolutely. They also contain calcium. Like I said, calcium can come from animal products, but also non-animal. So you just have to make sure that you are having enough of a varied diet and varied foods containing calcium, and then you probably hit your daily requirement.
Yeah.
Also, what forgot to mention with iron, that if you are having iron-rich foods, and those can also be animal or non-animal products, make sure you consume them with vitamin C, because vitamin C helps iron absorb in the body.
Nice.
By quite a lot. So if you have a steak, have a lemon wedge with it.
Yeah.
Or if you have spinach, also have a little bit of lemon squeeze on it if you have a spinach salad or something like that.
Oh, nice. I'm getting hungry. Okay. So, so I guess if someone is currently training, say for a marathon, triathlon, and so on, and this is on purpose an open question, so you can go in whatever direction you want with this. Where should that person start? Should they be trying to consume as many carbohydrates as possible? You know, what should they be doing? And the only reason why I mention this is, you know, I follow a lot of people on Instagram and so on, and you only have to kind of click on that and you'll see the most variations in diets. You know, you'll get people, you know, showing their watches with the time saying, oh, my performance is diminishing, I'm not sure what's happening, or wow, my performance is going through the roof. Is there a consistent approach to dietary requirements that you would recommend?
So before I start actually mentioning the nutrition, just making sure that you have enough recovery and rest would be something which is really, really important. So we can talk for hours about foods for energy production or foods to maintain muscle mass, but if you don't do enough recovery, if you don't sleep 8 hours a night, if you wake up early in the morning and you rushing into your next training session, you're never going to be at your top performance. So before we get into just to mention that, because that's quite important. So I would start with what macronutrients you should consume and how much of each macronutrient. So we obviously have carbohydrates, we've got protein, and we've got fat. And I just wanted to say quickly what are the function of each macronutrient. So for example, with the protein, those are the building blocks of our muscles. So protein is important to minimize the muscle damage, but also to build the muscles so we can go out and train. But also protein is important for any connective tissue, not only muscles. So our ligaments, our tendons, our skin is made of protein. So that's why protein is so important. So not only the connective tissue, but our protein is needed to build enzymes and hormones in our body. So a lot of people forget about those little things which can actually, if they're not well balanced, they will let us know that something's not right. So how much protein? So I would recommend for people doing sport, so it obviously varies from person to person, but good range of protein per day is from 1 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight.
Okay.
People can go tiny bit lower than that and people can go tiny bit higher, but safe good range is somewhere around 1 to 1.5. So that's your protein. So another macronutrient, fats. So I recommend having a portion of, fat is obviously quite dense nutrient. Mm-hmm. So a portion of fat for me is the thumb size.
Okay.
Portion of vegetable is a fist size. Yeah. So if you imagine a portion of fat, which is the thumb size, with every meal. So that will probably calculate into about 30% of our macronutrient intake. So why do we need fat? So fat is also needed for energy production.
Yeah.
We have a layer of fat around our organs to protect them. We also use fat to produce hormones. Our sex hormones are made of fat. That's why having a low fat diet can actually sometimes disturb some hormonal balance. We use fat to absorb vitamins. So all fat soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K, they need fat for absorption. So those are very important as well for, like I said, even energy production. Also, a third final macronutrient will be carbohydrate. So carbohydrate is the main fuel for our fuel and energy for our body, and it is also preferred fuel. So some people do obtain energy from fats. Some people prefer to obtain energy from carbohydrates, but body will always prefer, and it's easier for the body to get the fuel or the energy from carbohydrate. To get the energy from the fat is just a little bit harder. There are some small chemical reactions which needed to be taken in order to transfer or convert the fat into energy. So it is possible, but carbohydrate will be first preferred fuel for sport. Also, carbohydrate provide fiber, and fiber is very important for healthy gastrointestinal system. We can talk about that in a moment as well. Carbohydrates are very good food for our good bacteria located in large intestine. So if you sometimes hear about healthy microbiome,
yep.
That means that our bacteria in the gut are fed properly, and the fuel mainly for the bacteria, or the food for the bacteria, is provided from carbohydrates. How much carbohydrates, that also varies from person to person. So I would say obviously carbohydrates will be main macronutrient in a daily intake. So anywhere from 5 to 12 grams per kilogram of the body weight.
Okay.
As you can see, this is quite a big range, 5 to 12. So it really has to be practiced.
Okay. So there's a lot of initial information there of what people should consume. With regards to fats, are there particularly type of fats? I mean, you mentioned olive oil before, avocados. Are there particular type of fats that people should consume more of or less of?
Absolutely. So I can talk about this for hours. So mainly we're trying to avoid hydrogenated fats, which are made in the factories. Mm-hmm. So those are processed food and deep fried foods. So obviously I am advocate of having 1 or 2 naughty meals a week. However, mainly, most of the time, we should focus on consuming good fats. And good fats are, I have pretty much 3 or 4 sources of good fats which I recommend, and those are very, very simple and easy to remember. Those are olive oil, avocados, nuts and seeds, eggs, nut butters, and fish, oily fish. Without going too much in detail into which fats, but really trying to focus on having essential fatty acids. So those are the fats which we obtain from food. Essential fatty acids we cannot produce in the body internally, so we have to obtain them from foods, and avoid hydrogenated fats or deep fried fats.
Yeah, so the deep fried, the over processed,
yes,
pastries, that kind of packaged foods. Is that what we're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So any processed foods and any deep fried, I would say stay away from.
Okay, so people should consume more of those fats. The carbohydrate range, is quite big. Should people start on maybe the smaller end of the carbohydrate intake and work up from there, or should they go straight in for the big range?
So I would say start small, but also remember and try to think about it as having enough carbohydrate for your training session. So if you're not training that day, maybe consume more vegetables, more healthy fats, and protein. So I'm a big fan of flexible fueling. So it depends on what kind of session you're going to do during your day. You're going to provide, or you're going to consume those foods to provide the right fuel and energy. So for example, if you have a day of training, I would say have things like an omelette, which is healthy fat with some vegetables, and you can probably consume less carbohydrate on that day. If you know that you're going to have a high volume training session and low intensity, you can perhaps also try to think about fats, having more fats, because most of the time on the high volume and low intensity, you will use fats as energy.
Yeah.
But if you are going to the gym, if you're doing some high intensity training session, if you are doing tempo runs, interval runs, or interval training on the bike or swimming, you will need your carbohydrates to provide fuel. So I recommend start low on the rest day or low intensity and high volume day.
Yeah.
And increase the carbohydrates on high intensity sessions.
Okay, so the food intake just needs to meet the demands of whatever training you're doing.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's just, I think people get stuck into the notion of they need to hit certain requirements every day, and it has to be the same every day. And people are kind of still stuck in that kind of mindset of, no, this is how many carbohydrates I need, even on a maybe a complete rest day or whatever it is. But what we're saying is we should be flexible in our approach, that it should meet the demands of what sort of day that you're going to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And think about that. Your diet should be wholesome, full of vibrant colors, whole grains, legumes, good fats, like I said, having fish for essential fatty acids. So, it should be variety on the plate. They shouldn't be, I would stay away from having the same foods every day, day after day after day, because I mentioned healthy microbiome as well. To have a healthy gut or gastrointestinal system, you need variety of foods. If you stick to the same foods, let's say you're going to have broccoli and chicken and rice every day, and you're going to have broccoli and chicken and rice the next day, you're not feeding your opportunistic bacteria in the large intestine. And as I said, having a healthy gut, and what I can see in athletes as well, that a lot of athletes will have problems with their gastrointestinal system. So I would say most of the athletes I've seen in my clinic have some kind of compromised gastrointestinal system.
Okay. And why, again, in your opinion, why would that be important for athletes or people in general, really?
So as we said, athletes obviously are increased need of energy, because you're going to be running and cycling and doing all endurance sport for hours. You will need to eat more food to get more calories to maintain your life and also maintain your training. So because we are in that increased energy demand, a lot of people try to eat anything really just to keep the calories in.
Yeah.
And those foods tend to be sometimes processed food and sugary foods. And a lot of sugar in our body can also disturb our hormonal balance, but also feed the bad bacteria in our intestines. So I would say, if you want to have a healthy gastrointestinal system, make sure you have enough probiotic foods. I can explain in a moment what they are. Enough prebiotic foods in your diet, and that also comes under the variety of foods that we don't want to eat the same every day. The same food every day. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned the pre and probiotic foods. What sort of foods would they be?
So let's start with just what happens in our gut. So in the small intestine, we absorb our food. So the small intestinal wall is very important place in our body. This is where all the magic happens. So things don't just get transported. Things don't get cross through the intestinal wall. Yeah. They need good transport, so they have to be attached to something. So macronutrients and micronutrients have to be attached into something. Often it is protein, to be able to go through the gut wall.
Okay.
The gut wall is, or our small intestinal wall, is very important place. And if something goes wrong, if we don't have variety of foods, if we're not sitting down, eating at the table, and we are slouching, and we are perhaps looking at the screen, or not following the mindful eating techniques, or eating too fast, or for example not chew food properly, we then don't absorb half of those nutrients. So we then end up eating probably nice, expensive food, and nicely prepared by ourselves or somebody, and we're not actually absorbing it, we are excreting it. So that's why looking after a small intestine is very important. So in the large intestine, we have our gut bacteria. So the gut bacteria can produce vitamins for us. They also help us with immune system. Also, our gastrointestinal tract is connected with our brain, so there's a direct connection from intestines into brain. So it can actually improve our mood and improve our cognitive function. So that's why the healthy gut bacteria are so important. Also they can reduce the allergy risk, especially in infants, but in older adults as well. So that's why we need healthy gut bacteria to help us to do all those functions. So prebiotic foods are actually foods containing the bacteria. So those are foods like kefir, yogurts, sauerkraut, sourdough, pickles, kimchi, again, apple cider vinegar. So some of those foods are probably not appealing for some people. So you just have to find a way of getting probiotics in. Also, there is an option of supplementing, but I would say try food first, and then if it doesn't work for you, then try to supplement. Prebiotics are the substances or foods that feed our good gut bacteria. So prebiotics are actually very important for the gut bacteria to stay in our large intestine. So prebiotic foods are foods like banana, onion, asparagus, chicory, oats, red onions, red cabbage, foods like this, and those are feeding our beneficial bacteria. So always trying to remember to have variety of both is something I would recommend. Also, in addition to that, healthy and mindful eating techniques, like sitting upright when we eat our food, sitting away from the phone and sitting away from the screen, will send the right messages into our body that we're actually eating. And this is when our absorption is optimal, or at its optimum. So I would recommend having a family meal. I understand sometimes it's difficult, so probably aiming for one meal a day with your family when you sit at the table, when you actually talk about what you've done, and consume the food and look at the food, will also help to absorb the food. Chewing food properly is another one, probably what I recommend. So if we're having, for example, nuts and seeds in our salad, we need to make sure we break them down, because certain seeds are not beneficial for us if they just swallowed us whole. So for example, soaking and sprouting could be good idea of having of using, just to increase our absorption. And then another thing, probably to just have as if you imagine a healthy gastrointestinal system, is also elimination. So elimination of waste is also very important. So I would say minimum of one bowel movement a day optimal will be 3 to 4 bowel movements a day. I know.
I'd never get it done.
No.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, one is plenty for me, but
Yeah, it's obviously it's personal,
yeah.
and some people have a higher metabolism, some people have lower metabolism. But I would say if you're not going to the toilet once a day, then you probably need to start investigating it.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so there was I mean, there's lots of information for people just in that to pick apart. What about during an event or during training? Should people consume things, during an event or even just during training? Should that be done? Because I know a lot of companies sell things like energy gels and so on. Is that justified, or are there other things that we could do?
Yes, so let's start with how much. So if you're going into the event, everything's got to be practiced. So everything's got to be practiced in training, and then you will know how much food you're going to have in order to avoid your gastrointestinal issues, which I think 90% of endurance athletes will suffer at some point.
Yeah.
So during the exercise or during your race, the magic number is really between 30 and 60 carbohydrates per hour. And I know people who are having more, and I know people who have less. It depends. You've got to practice in training. So I would say most of the fuel should come from carbohydrates. But again, like I mentioned earlier on, you can train yourself to use fat as fuel as well. But it's never one or the other. You have to consume a mixture. You haven't got a switch when you can start converting fats into fuel or carbohydrates into fuel.
Yeah.
So start with having 30 grams of carbohydrates per hour. We normally would have it in the second hour of our workout or our training or our race. We don't normally consume much in the first hour because we have energy provided from the food before the exercise. Mm-hmm. So let's say you're into your second hour of your race or your training session, you would start with consuming 30 and slightly increase every time you go out on your training session, and see if you can increase it into 60. So I'd say 60 would be optimal number, but just investigate in what, if you're using gels or if you're using normal food as your fuel during the exercise. Investigate how much fructose and glucose, because you should have mainly glucose and a little bit of fructose. So 3-to-1 ratio of glucose into fructose is recommended. That's why we cannot, for example, do an Ironman or a race entirely on fruit, because fruit contains fructose, and fructose is absorbed in the body tiny bit longer than the glucose. Glucose is just quicker, but you just have to make sure you're topping up. So energy gels is one idea. You just have to test and see if you tolerate them, because some athletes can tolerate them very well and they use just one brand, sticking to one brand. But also something like, if you want to use real food, something like potatoes with salt on them will work very well. So see if you can experiment with that. Maybe having bananas, but also banana, just making sure that it's not too many, because there is higher fructose content.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the potatoes with the salt on, I've got an image of me carrying a baked potato. Would you chop it up? How would you, the practicality?
So if I work with a triathlete, for example, I would have them recommend to have them in the bag.
Yeah.
Put them on your bike pouch. Normally they use kind of like a little storage on the bike, and this is where they can store them, chop them in half, and this is very efficient fuel. Actually, some of the top athletes use just potatoes.
Nice.
Salt, and salt obviously very important for electrolyte balance.
Yeah.
So obviously when you sweat you lose your electrolytes, so that is carbohydrates and electrolytes in one meal. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd prefer that more than the gels. You know, I've had some gels where they're just disgusting, and some, you know, taste okay, but wow, there's such a variety.
Absolutely, and you know there are other examples, but you just need to experiment what works for you. Just use different brands, because I don't want to mention any brands.
Yeah.
You can maybe just contact me, and I'll let you know. But there are some brands on the market that actually looked very carefully into gastrointestinal issues, and they do have very good products that don't upset your stomach.
Okay.
They are good products, and you know they are, and gels, and you know drinks that are good quality.
What about hydration during? Is it, you know, as much as you can, or is it a measured, calculated approach?
So I recommend per hour having 800 milligrams, or sorry, milliliters of hydration of liquids an hour, depending also on sweat levels,
Yeah.
and depending on the temperature. So obviously if you sweat more, your temperature will be racing in somewhere where it's really, really hot. You will have more than that, but I would say 800, 750. I think standard bottle, bike bottle, is 750 ml.
Okay.
And having that every hour with electrolytes in already. So try not to have just water, because you will end up sweating your electrolytes, and replacing with water, you will develop some issues then. So always electrolytes in water. 700 to 800 milliliters of water an hour would be something I recommend. So you can also go by thirst, like you said, but thirst will set at 1% of dehydration already. So you are already dehydrated when you start feeling thirsty. So ideally is you should end up just topping up bit by bit every hour, having that ratio, that bottle ready, and monitor, rather than going by thirst, because it might be slightly too late. So as I said, thirst will set at 1% dehydration, but 6 to 7% dehydration, you will collapse.
Okay.
So it's quite narrow limit. Yeah. So
wow.
That's why you don't want to risk. You don't want to just develop any problems on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last marathon I did was the Milton Keynes marathon, and it was one of those weird days where it was like 27 degrees. It was like a fluke where it was really hot, and I remember I reached what mile? It was mile 17, because my family were there, and I hadn't had enough water, and that's the last memory I have. I've managed to complete the marathon, but those last like 9 miles, I have no real recollection, and severe dehydration. I hadn't calculated for how hot it was going to be on that day. All training was like 5-6 degrees, and all of a sudden it's spring.
Yeah, absolutely. So you always have to remember when it's going to be a hot day. Even though if you haven't trained in a hot condition, you will need a lot more hydration.
Yeah.
And I'd say from the experience I've seen with my clients, if you are racing in a really hot day, you also need to allow a little bit of a slower pace when you run. So you just need to, you're not going to be aiming for PB there probably.
You just need to be flexible and adapt. Yeah,
absolutely.
What about after like the event or training session? What should someone try to consume? Is there a system in place where you should consume X amount of carbohydrates straight after, or is it again a more flexible approach?
So after the exercise, the recommended ratio is 4:1 carbohydrates to protein. So when you finish the exercise, always think about two macronutrients, and that is protein and carbohydrate. So that's what you need to replace: protein for prevention of muscle damage, and carbohydrates to bring your blood sugar levels up. And this is the time when I think is a good time to have quick release carbs into your body. So I recommend having slow release carbohydrates. So things like brown rice, brown pasta, whole grains, vegetables. This is when you release the sugar into your bloodstream much slower. But post-exercise, you're already at its lowest. So then this is the time when I say to my clients, you can pretty much have fancy, make sure you have protein with it. So fast release carbohydrates to bring the blood sugar levels up quickly, and some protein to minimize muscle damage. So for example, that could be a smoothie with fruit and your protein powder. It could be turkey breast with potatoes, or baked potato with cottage cheese, oat cakes with hummus, something like a rice cake with guacamole and nut butter. So yeah, you can have a chocolate milk as well if you fancy it. So anything to bring your sugar levels back up to normal.
Okay, so that's what someone should. So it gives an understanding of what we should have straight after. When should the first, I guess, proper meal be? Like when do you go back to like maybe the slow releasing carbs and so on?
So I would recommend having a slow release carbohydrate meal 2 to 4 hours before your event or before your training session. And you can then follow up with a smaller snack, let's say an hour to before, an hour to an hour and a half before your event or your training session. So if you consume your meal too soon or too short for your event, you will end up with gastrointestinal issues because the food is still absorbing, and then that gut wall, which is very important, can be compromised. So 2 to 4 hours with your main meal, slow release carbs, and then follow up with something like fruit bread or dried fruit, or flapjack or something like that, which is a smaller meal, 1 to 1.5 hours pre-exercise.
Nice. Wow. So I mean, for the listeners and the viewers, there's a ton of decent information there, definitely for people to get started with. So just to, I guess, start wrapping things up, if someone wanted to get hold of you because they wanted a more in-depth consultation and plan, or they wanted to go on one of your training camps, can you remind the listeners and viewers where they can get hold of you?
So my website it's being built, but it's not ready yet. So it will be ready probably in a month's time. And this is when my qualification will go through. So at the moment, I can see clients online through my college, and I can have a consultation. I offer consultations through the college, and normally it's about 2-hour consultation. It's quite in depth because we're looking at the whole body, so that's why it's so long. So you can probably get hold of me. The easiest way to get hold of me would be at the moment through Instagram or Facebook under embracenutrition.org. And later on, you will be able to find me on my website. But I am getting my qualification through next month. So this is when I'm going to start seeing clients privately.
Nice. Fantastic. Well, Paulina, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate you kind of allowing us a decent insight into some decent nutritional bombs, and my tummy is rumbling. or the talk of food. Wow. So is there anything you would like to add or finish on?
So I think it's good to just wrap up with just how do you put it all in practice, because it's a lot of information, a lot of numbers. But if you think about your plate, if you think about colorful foods, whole grains, legumes, fish, reducing meat consumption, not having heavy red meats often, but just make sure you have some plant-based protein and animal-based protein. Keeping an eye on those micronutrients like antioxidants, zinc, and all the vitamins. Eat the rainbow or eat the alphabet. Also, you can write the letters, vegetables on the fridge and tick them off. Just having those handy tips will definitely get you started. And if you think about healthy nutrition or healthy sport nutrition, you don't actually have to calculate every single day and have the same food every single day. Just make sure it's colorful, it's wholesome, it's coming, you know where it's coming from, you prepare the food yourself, and you can't go wrong with that. It's quite simple.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you ever so much for having me.